Good morning and welcome. Welcome to the 2016 plenary session hosted by Fortis TCI. This is our fourth plenary session, and I am pleased to once again serve as your mistress of ceremonies. For those of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Talisha Simons, and I'm the manager of corporate communications with Fortis TCI. Before we begin, I would like you to allow me to establish protocol. I would like to start by welcoming our acting governor, Her Excellency, the Honorable Anya Williams, the Turks and Caicos Islands Premier and Minister of Health, Agriculture, and Human Services, Honorable Dr. Rufus Ewing, visiting guest speaker, the former Prime Minister of Barbados, the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, Minister of Home Affairs, Transportation, and Communication, Honorable George Lightbourne, Deputy Speaker of the House, Honorable Josephine Connolly, members of the House of Assembly, Honorable Clarence Selver, senior government officials, Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Cheryl Ann Jones, Deputy Permanent Secretaries, Mrs. Tamara Robinson and Mr. Russell Cox, head bishops and representatives of ministerial bodies, chairpersons and directors of statutory bodies, heads of departments, our Fortis TCI President and CEO, Mr. Edenton Powell, today's guest speakers, panelists, and panel facilitator, Mrs. Melissa Marchand, Professor Gilbert Morris, Father Bernard Bean, Mr. Oswald Simons, and Mr. Larry Lawrence, the Fortis TCI executive team and staff, businesswomen and men, students, members of the media, and distinguished guests. Again, welcome. At this year's plenary session, we operate under the theme Caribbean Opportunities and Threats in the Information Age, and we have an outstanding lineup of presentations for you from our guest speakers. Today, we seek to hold healthy discussions and engage you on topics like economic growth, the digital age, education, technology, finance, and much, much more. So I do hope that you are ready for a spectacular day. Time being of the essence, following each presentation, Father Bernard Bean, he will accept roughly 2 questions from the audience on behalf of the presenter. After we hear from our guest speakers, our program does include a panel discussion this year. All the guest speakers will sit on that panel, and we will then engage the audience in much more discussion. A few other housekeeping matters that I have for you. Wi-Fi is available. You can connect to the Fortis TCI Plenary 2016, and the passcode should be listed here on the monitors for you. That passcode is Fortis TCI. And today's event, you should also know, is being live streamed in its entirety. For those of you that wish to share the link, that link should also be on the screen for you on the monitors there, so you can share that with anyone you wish. Or you can direct them to our Facebook page. We have it listed there for easy access. Now, I do want to note that members of Cabinet, they have a Cabinet meeting today. We are so grateful to have them here with us and that they took the time to be here. And we want to allow them that easy exit so that they can make their meeting. So we will get started, and I'll ask Honorable Anya Williams to bring her welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Let me start first by saying what a pleasure it is to be here at the 4th annual Fortis TCI plenary session. I also want to congratulate Fortis TCI for actually continuing on with this very good initiative. I know it began some years ago, and sometimes we start out in things, but it's always good to remain consistent in that you have done. Continuing over the years, you've continued to increase the level of talent that you've brought to the Turks and Caicos Islands to begin these important topics and discussions. And I'm happy that we have here with us today the Right Honorable Owen Arthur. You are very lucky, I would say, because he was supposed to be here some years ago for our Permanent Secretary and Minister's Retreat. And unfortunately, there was a flood in Barbados at the time, and his constituency, he told us, came first. So
that is true.
He was not able to make it at that time, but I can assure you that having had the opportunity to be in his presence before when he conducted a meeting for deputy governors, you will certainly be in for a treat. The topics of the discussion today are, of course, very important. You're speaking about the Caribbean and threats and opportunities. And the Turks and Caicos Islands, like every other Caribbean island, faces its challenges. But we, of course, have so many opportunities. The Turks and Caicos Islands is rich in talent, it's rich in natural resources, and we've already laid a great foundation. We have now before us, we are seeing some of the best economic growth ever in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Our GDP numbers continue to grow each year. We have a strong platform. Our finances are, the Premier would say, well in order, and we are looking to grow and expand our economy. As we do that, the private sector, of course, is going to play a very important role, as does Fortis TCI. And that is something that we want to continue to build upon. We want to continue to build upon our relationships with the private sector. We want to increase our private sector. We want persons to not only visit the Turks and Caicos Islands, but we want them to come and invest and live here amongst us as well. We are looking to diversify the economy, and that means moving into different uncharted areas. Every Caribbean island can boast of tourism, but there has to be something unique that sets us all apart, and that is where we believe that technology can come in. How you embrace technology, how you embrace change is something that's very important, and also something that's very difficult to deal with. Fortis TCI, I'm sure you would face those challenges as well, because as we move into this new age, everyone is calling for new and innovative programs for sustainable energy and so on. How you incorporate that into your already existing structure is going to be something that's going to be very important. And government needs to play a role in that as well, because we all have to work in partnership together. So today is about building on new conversations, starting new dialogue, looking at how we bring about positive change in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and trying to see how we can continue to forge our partnership together. We are certainly happy to be here to take part in these discussions. As was stated earlier, we do have a cabinet meeting today. We are 2 days away from the end of our financial year, and we will be leaving to note probably about 20 contracts that we have to get out before tomorrow. So we have a very busy day ahead of us, but certainly thank you for the opportunity to be here. Once again, congratulations on what I know will be another successful plenary session. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Williams. I now invite Honorable Dr. Rufus Ewing, our Premier, to bring his greetings.
Thank you, Ms. Simons, and good morning to everyone. I would like to first of all start out by extending our thanks and congratulations again to Fortis for holding this fourth annual plenary session. What I can say is that each year the numbers of persons attending the conference is growing larger and larger. In addition to the quality of the speakers, well, they never fail to deliver on presenting us with high quality of speakers, persons with knowledge and depth of knowledge and experience to share with us here in this session. With that, I would like to, as Acting Minister of Tourism, to extend welcome to Turks and Caicos to the Right Honorable Owen Arthur and Ms. Marchand. Right. So welcome to Turks and Caicos.
Thank you.
And we do hope that you enjoy your stay. I'd also like to extend a welcome home again to Father Bain. I know that you couldn't stay away for so long. It's a pleasure to have you back home again, even though it may be short. I hope to see you time and time again. Today's topics that I see listed in the booklet are indeed very relevant, and even more so relevant to Turks and Caicos as we sit at this juncture in our development. As most persons will know, the economic challenges that we faced over the past several years. Now that we have resuscitated our economy, now that we have stabilized our economy, we're now poised to move forward with steady trajectory of good fiscal growth, fiscal discipline, and we need to focus on a number of issues. We all know that we are living as a small island developing state, like most of the Caribbean region. We are facing more and more challenges with increasing globalization and the challenges that globalization brings to us as small island developing states. But with those challenges also, with globalization, comes opportunities. And as small island developing states, we have to be able to position ourselves to capitalize on those opportunities and to use best practices in the areas of innovation and technology, in the area of energy conservation, and energy systems. And I am looking for us to play our part in ensuring that we have sustainable development that is well balanced. One of the increasing global threat is that of climate change, and I'm sure you may hear that in this session here. And because of our small island developing states and small islands that depend heavily on tourism, we need to look at how vulnerable we are and what we can do to play our part, our small part, in reducing the carbon footprint that is contributed globally. We also need to look at how we as Turks and Caicos Islanders can continue to diversify our economy, because economic diversification will make us more resilient as a country, more resilient economically, more resilient as individuals having greater opportunities for jobs and job creation and business growth. And this is what our government is focusing on, ensuring that we as Turks and Caicos Islanders can capitalize on all of those opportunities that are made available to us as we continue to not only grow, but to compete globally. We're living in an age whereby competitiveness is everything, and we have to be able to compete. If we can't compete, we will perish, and so or we will succumb to the increasing pressures of globalization. So I would like to thank Fortis once again. I know that you have a very full agenda with lots of topics of discussion, and I am sorry that I will not be able to listen to all of the discussions. I hope we can finish the cabinet meeting quickly and get back here to at least catch some parts of it. I was looking forward to actually postponing cabinet until tomorrow so that I could attend this whole session today. But as the deputy governor say, there are lots of things that are very critical that we have to get off the table and off the plate very shortly within the next day and a half. And so because of that, my ministers and I and those members of cabinet will have to not be able to be here for most of the presentations. But I wish you all the best and have a fruitful discussions as we collaborate and partner and putting our minds together in trying to make Turks and Caicos, the Caribbean region, better places to work, live, do business, and to be sustainably economically. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Dr. Ewing. And I would like to, again, on behalf of Fortis TCI, extend great thanks to both the acting governor and the premier for being here, knowing their schedule today. I would like to now invite our President and CEO, Mr. Eddington Powell, to bring his opening remarks and introduce our speaker, our keynote speaker, the Right Honorable Owen Arthur.
Good morning, and thank you very much. My substantive opening comments are in the booklet, so I won't repeat them. But with the protocol having been established, I'd like to use these few minutes that Talisha has given me at the podium to thank and acknowledge some very deserving people. Let me begin by acknowledging and thanking the Acting Governor, Her Excellency, the Honorable Anya Williams. And just to note that Her Excellency is a past speaker and presenter at the plenary session. It's good to have you back, Your Excellency. I'm pleased to acknowledge the presence of our Premier, the Honorable Dr. Rufus Ewing. And I would like to thank you, sir, and the members of your staff responsible for protocol for the assistance and support offered and given to us. We have in attendance this morning the Deputy Speaker of the House. I'd like to acknowledge her and thank her for being here. We have other members of Cabinet and members and honorable members of the House, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here. One of the dangers of doing this is that you prepare a speech, and then half the people you're having a speech don't show up, and the other half they don't show up, so you're constantly changing as you go along. I also like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and panelists, the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, Miss Melissa Marchand, Professor Gilbert Morris. Now, Professor Morris is a past speaker and presenter at the plenary session, and we are pleased to have him back. In fact, Professor Morris was a speaker at the very first plenary session that we had. Father Bernard Bean, who has been welcomed by a number of people already, but I would like to add to that, and who will facilitate the panel discussion. He is a returnee to the plenary session as well. He's a past speaker and presenter and facilitator. As many of you know, Father Bean, who is a Turks Islander, recently moved to Barbados and graciously acquiesced to our invitation to facilitate the panel discussion this morning. And Father Bean, is always a pleasure to be with you and have you back with us. Mr. Larry Lawrence, Country Manager, CIBC First Caribbean, and Mr. Oswald Simons, thank you all. I would like to acknowledge the Utilities and Energy Commissioner, Mr. Cummins, who is here with us this morning. It would be very remiss of me and indeed unforgivable if I did not acknowledge the presence of Dr. Sonia Greenwich Franklin. Dr. Franklin is the Executive Director of the Barbados Institute of Management and Productivity, which is one of the oldest and one of the premier business development organizations in the Caribbean. Fortis TCI is a member of BIMAP, but our relationship with Dr. Franklin goes way beyond that. Dr. Franklin is a friend to Fortis TCI, was instrumental in the Right Honorable Owen Arthur being with us this morning. The winning team of this year's science fair is here with us. I would like to acknowledge them and their teachers. They represent Maranatha School. You could please stand for me. I would also ask the students of the British Collegiate Sixth Form class and the students from the community college to please stand to be acknowledged. Thank you very much. You can be seated. And the sin of omission would really be if I did not acknowledge Talisha and her team, the IT team and everybody else who worked to put this together. And Sonia, where's Sonia? Sonia runs the company, everybody knows that. Before introducing getting to our speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the executive team and the directors of the division and departments of Fortis TCI who's sitting right in front of me, as well as all of the Fortis TCI team members and former team members. I see Judah Missick is here. And if you could please stand, please, to be acknowledged. Thank you very much. Now, before introducing the first speaker, let me run through the obligatory disclaimer that the views and opinions expressed by today's speakers and panelists do not represent the position of Fortis TCI Limited or our parent company, Fortis Inc. Ladies and gentlemen, I know I stand between you and the people you've come to hear, so it's my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, who really needs no introduction. A life dedicated to public service would be the most appropriate way to describe Owen Seymour Arthur, Barbados' 5th Prime Minister from September 1994 to January 2008. He was educated in Barbados at All Saints Boys School, Coleridge and Parry, Harrison College, and the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies, UWI. After which he studied at UWI's Mona campus for his master's degree in economics, the field in which he has gained national, regional, and international renown and respect. His career as a professional economist began in Jamaica in 1973, where he served at the Department of Management at the University of the West Indies as a research assistant. He joined the National Planning Agency of Jamaica as an assistant planner in 1974 and reached the level of chief planner by 1979. He subsequently served as director of economics at the Jamaica Bauxite Institute between 1979 and 1981. He also served on the board of directors of the Jamaica Scientific Council and Jamaica Industrial Development Corporation. Returning to Barbados in 1981, he held the post of Chief Project Analyst in the Ministry of Finance and Planning. In 1982, he became a research fellow at UWI's Institute of Social and Economic Research as a research fellow. He was appointed as a member of the board of directors of the Barbados Central Bank, the Barbados Industrial Development Corporation, and as chairman of the Barbados Agricultural Development Corporation. Famously described by the late Prime Minister of Barbados, Tom Adams, as one of the finest brains of the 20th century, his contribution to public life through politics started with being a senator in 1983, and in his 1984 election to the House of Assembly, where he's the longest serving member. He became leader of the opposition in 1993, thereafter leading the Barbados Labour Party, the PLP, to a record 3 straight election victories in 1994, 1999, and 2003. While in government, he was Barbados' Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs for 14 years. At the regional level, as the Prime Minister of Barbados, he assumed lead responsibility for the CARICOM Single Market Economy, CSME. At the international level, he was the chairman of the Commonwealth World Bank Task Force that was constituted to formulate a global development agenda for small states. He is a holder of the Order of Jose Marti, awarded by the government of Cuba. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming to the podium the Right Honorable Owen.
Your Excellency, Acting Governor, Premier, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you must allow me to observe the proper spirit before I come on to my formal address. Today, I speak to you with a full and contrite heart in having to acknowledge that this is my first visit to the Turks and Caicos. I ought to find an excuse in my heart of the politician by telling you that delinquency on my part is due to the difficulty of traveling in the Caribbean. But I think that you would know that that would be an unbelievable lie. The Premier is not here, but perhaps I should warn him that my inability to visit you before now is because it is not something that is admitted that persons serving as politicians should be allowed to visit paradise. So, though with much difficulty have I come hither, yet no, it does not repent me of the difficulty it has taken me. And like General MacArthur, I shall return. I now turn to my formal address. These are indeed the times that try men's souls. It was always going to be an endeavor fraught with the greatest difficulty for small states in the Caribbean to succeed in developing themselves as cohesive societies founded on strong economies. However, to date, these small states have managed to accomplish a lot despite having very little to work with. In the process, a relatively high level of development has been attained by the nations of the region. It has been attained chiefly by their calling upon the creative imagination of their people as their chief development resource, by their exercise of prudence in the management and the use of their resources, by reaping the economic dividend that comes from good governance, and by taking advantages of all opportunities made available to them by the international economic community. The societies of our region have also built up and have been able to call upon a formidable stock of the resource called resilience, the sheer capacity to absorb and to adapt to shocks and economic crises, which have become their usual and their ordinary circumstance. In such a situation, and blessed with such developmental attributes, it has always been tempting to believe that in the Caribbean, things will work themselves out in the long run. For most Caribbean states, however, a peculiar kind of long run has now arrived, but not one that portends a happy ending. For a juncture has now been reached where a confluence of adverse factors and circumstances stands in the way of the sustained development of the economies of the region. Indeed, to a degree never before experienced, the small economies of the region now find themselves caught up in a vortex which is threatening to take them on a dangerous spiral downwards. As such, the prospects for sustained development in the region will depend on the manner and the extent to which the economic vortex, which is threatening to overwhelm the economies of the region, is addressed and is countered. In this presentation, I will try to capture the dimensions and the effects of this economic vortex by reference to its following salient features. First, most Caribbean economies have reached a stage where their debt load is unsustainable and has to be corrected as the necessary but not the sufficient condition, the necessary condition to enable the economies to be put again on a path to sustained growth and development. However, the fiscal consolidation programs which have been conceived and which are being implemented to deal with the debt problems can themselves negatively affect the conditions that conduce economic growth and development. In consequence, the manner in which these two contending forces are reconciled will determine much of the future of the economies concerned. Secondly, the environment within which the development of Caribbean economies takes place has been undergoing rapid changes, but the countries of the region have not been making the necessary adaptations to become competitive economies in the new environment. You know, the law of thermodynamics apply to economies as they apply to nature, that all physical systems left to themselves will tend towards a state of atrophy. The region therefore faces the danger of becoming societies that depend upon economies which are not viable. Novel and unprecedented transformations are required at the structural level and in relation to the policy framework to make Caribbean economies truly competitive. Third, the directions and the dynamics of change in the global economy have thrown up and will continue to throw up challenges to the typical Caribbean economy that will require far-reaching proactive responses from the region to keep the region on a sustainable growth path. Fourth, the geopolitical marginalization of the region following the end of the Cold War has reduced the support from traditional sources for regional development and is now a major constraint on its sustained development. And fifth, the faltering of the regional integration movement in the region has harmed the prospect for Caribbean development and needs urgent action. I deal first with debt and the Caribbean economy. Caribbean economies have now come to be characterized as having some of the worst debt profiles of any groups of countries. In many cases, debt exceeds 100% of the gross domestic product. Research by experts such as Reinhardt and Rogoff has estimated that when debt exceeds 90% of GDP, it becomes a principal drag on economic growth, the so-called debt overhang. Research undertaken by Caribbean economists like Greenwich have, however, estimated that the debt overhang, the threat at which debt becomes a threat to growth, is reached at a much lower level, 60% of the GDP. In some Caribbean economies, the servicing of the debt has also become a problem. For example, in the case of Barbados, the debt service now accounts for almost 60% of government's revenues. When debt servicing engrosses such a large proportion of the revenues, it triggers a cutback in expenditure on services that are vital to the well-being of the people and on activities which are needed to support development, especially capital development by the state. Since the growth in the debt is driven by the size of the annual deficit in the public finances, programs to contain the fiscal deficit to sustainable levels through a combination of tax increases and expenditure adjustments have now become a typical feature of public policy in most Caribbean countries. Such fiscal consolidation programs have, however, given rise to their own conundrum. By their very nature, they serve to reduce demand, compress growth, and lead to a self-perpetuating cycle of low or negative growth, falling revenues, unsustainable deficits, and increasing debt. Ideally, the economies of the region therefore have to find a formula by which the debt problem and the phenomenon of low or negative growth have to be addressed as a single coherent undertaking. Finding such a formula has, however, proven to be a very taxing exercise in the implementation of recent public policy in the Caribbean. A study recently published by the Caribbean Development Bank entitled Public Sector Debt in the Caribbean: An Agenda for Reduction and Sustainability has shed important light on the matter and indeed on the possible way forward. In exploring the sources of recent debt, it is established that in many instances, the assumption by the state of non-central government liabilities, such as the losses of public enterprises, expenses arising from public-private sector partnerships, and the losses of private financial entities assumed by the state, have been the principal causes of the recent rapid accumulation of debt in the Caribbean. It concludes, and I quote, "Since the largest contributor to debt is the effect of the off-budget events, then neither fiscal consolidation nor improved debt management will be sufficient to remove the threat of rising indebtedness from the region. Broader issues of public governance need to be addressed, such as the role and the management of public enterprises and the regulation and monitoring of the financial sectors." If I may draw upon the case of Barbados to shed light on the issue, a fiscal consolidation program entailing significant tax increases and expenditure cuts by the government, central government departments, has thus far been carried out. Yet, the fiscal problem persists. It is all bound up in the fact that transfers to state enterprises amount recently to $1.2 billion a year and need to be reduced by $200 million to create conditions for stability to obtain in the public finances of the country. And this scenario does not take into account the financial obligations the government of Barbados may have to assume in attempting to settle the outstanding matter with Clico Insurance Company. It cannot be therefore gainsaid that fundamental issues relating to governance itself will have to be faced and resolved in order for the debt crisis that is raging in the region to be brought under control. In this regard, Far-reaching programs of privatization will have to be put in place, and the proceeds put into segregated accounts to be used to help pay down the debt. In addition, new enabling programs will have to be conceived and implemented to enable the private sector to become more involved in areas such as healthcare and education, which have historically been deemed to be domains for public sector activity almost exclusively. Governments will also have to exercise the discipline to avoid investing in high-risk commercial enterprises and to exercise circumspection in the debt it guarantees on behalf of private entities. Above all, given the limited scope for the use of fiscal stimulus to generate growth, greater emphasis will have to be placed by Caribbean governments on the reform of the business culture and the putting in place of appropriate enabling environments to spur greater private sector activities as essential aspects of the involvement of the state itself in the economic activity of this region. And that brings me, therefore, to the second issue, a new growth paradigm. The transformation required the second issue is the new growth paradigm, and it will deal with the transformation required in the Caribbean to accommodate changes in the environment within which the economies operate. In order for the Caribbean to attain and to stay on a viable path to growth and development, a coherent and sustained effort has to be made to transform its economies from being trade preference dependent economies, which they have traditionally been, and debt propelled economies, which they have recently been as well, to being investment driven economies marked by a very high component of private foreign capital, and eventually into genuine export propelled economies. Most Caribbean economies are still in the realm of debt propelled economies. They must be transformed into investment driven economies. To follow such a path to sustained development, far-reaching transformations will have to be made to the business culture in our region. To begin with, as small open economies, it is of paramount importance that the Caribbean come to master its trade relations. The evidence, however, points to the fact that it is doing exactly the opposite. In the region, indeed, the region has been described as facing an increasing deglobalization insofar as its share of global exports have fallen from 0.5% in 1980 to less than 0.2% in 2012. Its most important export sector, tourism, has also lost market share in the global tourism market. And the proportion of the region's exports which have been growing to new poles of growth in the emerging world have been far lower than expected. This has been due in large measure to the fact that in respect of every critical determinant of trade performance, including trade policy as reflected in the level of tariffs, trade facilitation as measured by the World Bank Logistics Performance Index, and the cost of the export of container, the efficiency and availability of shipping services connectivity index, the Caribbean reflects the worst indices of any region in the world. In addition, there's annually published A.T. Kearney's Top 50 Global Services Location Indices, which tracks the attractiveness of respective jurisdictions for offshore business opportunities. Only Jamaica and Trinidad occasionally makes it to the top 50s, although we want to be locations for offshore business. By equal measure, Caribbean economies have never represented themselves in the top tier of countries in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business report, nor the Global Competitiveness report, although other small countries have held top places in such reports. And although much progress has been made by the region in respect of the information technology sector, the region is still lagging significantly behind in terms of access to and the affordability of broadband services as compared to its main competitors, and such capacities have become the real input in driving global development. These comparative indices have been assembled and presented as one to allow attention to be focused on a very critical aspect of the Caribbean developmental dilemma. It is that the Caribbean is now having to operate in a global economy where the principal drivers of economic activity are technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, trade facilitation, and factors which directly impact the culture of doing business in a manner that enhances productivity, reduce costs, widen production possibilities, and facilitate the expansion of existing enterprises and the creation of new ones. That is the global environment. Other small economies have deliberately calibrated their economic management and development policies and strategies to place themselves in the very top tier of the indices that measure competitiveness by reference to the indices cited earlier, and are making the necessary transformations in response to new circumstances and new opportunities. Making these transitions and transformations do not require much fiscal effort, and hence recommend themselves as being highly effective tools for a country which, like the Caribbean, do not have much fiscal space with which to stimulate economic activity. It is therefore necessary that in order to become investment-driven and export-propelled economies as required by prevailing and projected circumstances, Caribbean countries should begin to incorporate best practices and best global benchmarks in their trade and business facilitation programs and change their business culture to make such adjustments becoming of lasting values. I turn against this background to my perception of the global challenges. As small economies, the typical Caribbean economy is particularly susceptible to major developments in the rest of the world. In this regard, the formation of mega trade blocs, such as the one that President Obama is seeking to put in place, the formation of new global supply and value chains of which the Caribbean are not a part, and the proliferation of bilateral trade agreements among countries other than the Caribbean, and the Caribbean country has the lowest number of bilateral agreements of any region in the world. All of these things, all of these factors are new challenges driven by forces of economic liberalization, and they will serve further to marginalize our region. In addition, the World Economic Forum at a recent meeting in February of this year was presented with a report entitled, and I quote, "Intelligent Assets, Unlocking the Circular Economy Potential." It deals with the way in which the impending digital transformation will lead to the fourth industrial revolution and holds the promise to redefine the very basis of material-reliant industry economy. And the report states that enabled by the internet, a new model of growth is emerging, whereby passive connectivity is becoming the new infrastructure. Sorry, not passive, pervasive connectivity is becoming the new infrastructure, enabling effective material flows and keeping products, components, and materials at their highest values at all times. A regional economy such as that of the Caribbean that clings on to an industrial policy based on the use of fiscal incentives and trade protectionist measures clearly will have no place in the world of the fourth industrial revolution. This perhaps sounds like science fiction. What is not in the realm of science fiction is a challenge the region is facing in maintaining correspondent banking services that are necessary to facilitate cross-border financial transactions between the Caribbean and the rest of the world. The Financial Action Task Force has for some time now been overseeing the implementation of rules to prevent money laundering and to combat the financing of terrorism. These rules are very stringent, involve the use of know your customer and know your customers' procedures by financial institutions, among other protocols. In treating to suspected cases of financial improprieties, banks are required to adopt a risk-based approach, whereby they seek to mitigate risk on a case-by-case basis, rather than avoid risk by ending their relationships with the client institutions. But the fines for breaching and the regulations imposed on international banks for the breaches of rules and procedures have been enormous. Largely in response, there has therefore been an acceleration of the process of de-risking, whereby foreign banks have been entirely terminating their relationships with Caribbean institutions rather than adopting procedures to mitigate risk. This process of de-risking is now also being driven by another very powerful force. The global recession of 2008 was triggered by the lack of liquidity in the international banking system. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision has therefore defined under Basel III new liquidity coverage ratios, which ascribe to correspondent banking deposits a runoff rate of 100%, as compared to the runoff rate of between 25 and 40% for other operational deposits in terms of a shock lasting for no more than 30 days. Banks which, for reasons of profitability, be more inclined to terminate banking relationships when their correspondent banks' rates deposits are regarded as being subject to 100% runoffs in times of shocks. Money services businesses and other institutions which deal with remittances, as well as Caribbean indigenous banks, will be adversely affected by this new development. These new arrangements can serve to significantly reduce the capacity of the Caribbean to carry out cross-border financial transactions at a time when the development strategy which the region must pursue requires the region to accentuate the premium it places on cross-border transactions themselves. It is therefore a challenge which needs to be confronted by the building of strategic partnerships between the region and the wide cross-section of countries and institutions which are being adversely affected by the new liquidity coverage ratios. For their part, our regional regulators and supervisors of the financial sector must put in place and continuously refine the institutional capacity to ensure that the region does not have a compliance deficit in dealing with matters relating to combating money laundering and the combating of financial terrorism. I deal next with geopolitical marginalization. To support its sustainable development, the Caribbean region must evolve new economic and financial relationships with the new poles of growth and emerging economies of the global economy. That process has gathered pace in recent times, as evidenced by the significant role that China and Venezuela have been playing in supporting regional development in the Caribbean. By the same token, it should strengthen long-standing, long-existing relationships with its traditional partners. And Mr. Obama, that is where our greatest difficulty with you resides. The evidence on this matter has not been positive and points to the fact that the region has been made the victim of a process of geopolitical marginalization. To illustrate, in an era when there was the threat of communist penetration in the region, the Caribbean enjoyed a broad-based economic partnership with its main trading partner, the United States of America. That era saw the introduction of the CBI, the provision of access to the Caribbean states to capital through the recycling to the region of taxes on profits generated in Puerto Rico under the 936 program, special programs for the region to benefit as locations for USA foreign sales corporations, and the provision of tax credits to US companies for holding their conventions in the Caribbean. Can you imagine in Turks and Caicos how you would rejoice if American companies were still allowed to write off the cost of conventions against their taxes? Times have, however, changed. That program of broad-based developmental support has been brought to an end. Indeed, the Caribbean's relationship with its main partner has come now to be largely defined in terms of security arrangements and partnerships to counter tax evasion and to participate in the illegal fight against illegal drugs. In addition, the countries of the OECS, though members of the hemispheric family, have not yet been allowed to become borrowers directly from the Inter-American Development Bank. The recent move by the government of the United Kingdom to create an infrastructural fund for the CBT to enable Caribbean countries to have grant funding to modernize their infrastructure is a positive development which must be applauded. But there is a need for a new spirit and a new substance to be brought to bear to the relationship the region has with its main trading partner, the United States of America. Our region faces the challenge of having to build new economic systems that can flourish in an age of rapid technological change. It has to face the challenge of transforming industries such that they can prosper in the face of new rules of trade and do so in a manner that can meet the rising expectations of its citizens. It therefore needs to evolve new multi-dimensional relationships with its main trading partners that bears a relationship to the multi-dimensional task which is at hand. China, Venezuela, and many of the emerging economies of the South are in the process of building multi-dimensional relationships with the nations of the region of a kind that can redound to the benefit of both sets of countries. It is important for the purposes of sustainable development of the region that a similar spirit comes to guide the region's relationships with its traditional partners, and perhaps our people in the diaspora need to be told this, even as they walk lockstep to join for a candidate of a political party. We must become like the Jews. We must leverage our support. I turn finally to regional integration. Charity must begin at home. It becomes a nonsense for the region to plead for better terms to structure its integration in the global economy, while it neglects its own effort to build a strong integration movement within the Caribbean. There is no viable path for sustainable development for societies which are as small as those in the Caribbean that does not entertain a strong element of regional economic integration. The Caribbean is the world's smallest and most vulnerable region, and is the one which needs most to put the mechanisms of integration to work as a central aspect of its developmental program. It is therefore essential that the initiative to build a virtual regional economy is revived, re-energized, and indeed is broadened. It is therefore of strategic importance that CARICOM conceives of and puts in place an economic partnership agreement with Cuba and with the Dominican Republic on the same scale and for the same reasons that it has put in place an economic partnership agreement with Europe. So you must allow me to conclude. C.L.R. James, in an article entitled "The Birth of a Nation," once delivered himself of the following observation. He said, "Nobody knows what the Caribbean population is capable of. Nobody has ever attempted to find out." I say to you that there can be no doubt that the sheer extent and complexity of the economic challenge that now confronts the region will test the mettle of the people of the region to the hilt. And it is to be hoped that the resilience which has enabled the region to rise above slavery, to rise above indentured servitude, to tame racism, and to end colonial domination will come to the fore, and that the region, facing its sternest economic challenge in its history, will prove James wrong and show the world what the people of the Caribbean are truly capable of. I thank you for this opportunity.
Good morning to all. And let me first of all thank Mr. Powell and Fortis family for inviting me back home to be a part of your fourth plenary discussion. And I was humbled by the invitation. And I want to acknowledge the distinguished panel and to thank the former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, for such an informed and in-depth presentation. And I can assure you that we're going to have I'm saying right now that we're going to have a wonderful time in sharing ideas as we build our Caribbean, particularly here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. It's good to be back. Now, you didn't come to hear me, and so we're going to take two questions for the Right Honorable Owen Arthur. Mr. Robinson is at the mic first, and sir.
Good morning. My name is Royal Robinson. I'd like to ask the Right Honorable Owen Arthur what policy matrix he thinks can be further developed to transform the Caribbean region from debt-driven economies to investment-driven economies.
Well, sir, you want me to repeat the speak? May I say the most important is to change the business culture, to remove the constraints that stand in the way of the Caribbean being able to attract capital and to move to export development. The Caribbean does not have the fiscal space to do so. We can't stimulate by tax or spend. Therefore, there are things in the business culture that, if changed, will allow the Caribbean to attract investment and to build export sectors by reducing costs, increasing productivity, and generate reasonable rates of returns. Growth and development comes from only two sources: the expansion of existing enterprises and the creation of new ones. And everything in the Caribbean now stands virtually in the way of the expansion of existing enterprises and the creation of new ones. They lead to things that are too high in cost, reduce productivity, and do not allow for rates of returns to justify investment. And I spelled them out. In all aspects of our trade determinants, whether it's the rates of tariffs, connectivity, whatever else, the Caribbean has the worst indices in the world. If you go to the ease of doing business published by the World Bank, these best countries in the world for ease of doing business, small countries, Caribbeans languish either in the middle or the bottom of the tier. Now, there's no fiscal constraint to changing your ease of doing business. Very often it is about how long does it take to register a property, business. The Caribbean has to decide that we have to do what the rest of the small economies do. Go to the very top of the pile and respect the ease of doing business. The most important input into a service economy is not raw materials, it is business facilitation. And we just simply have to get that right. As I said, the Kearney report on where the best places in the world to locate outsource business, which is the top 50. We want to have business outsourced to us, but we are not in the top 50. There's no reason why we should not in the top 50. Finland and others are. And all I'm really saying is that the rules of international trade are against you. Those who want to go back to agriculture and manufacturing will find that there has been a change in international trade rules. There was a time in the past when countries like the Caribbean could use protectionist devices. The enabling round of the Tokyo, enabling clause in the Tokyo round says that you could use tariffs and non-tariff barriers, quotas to promote manufacturing and agriculture. Those things died in 1994. And it becomes very difficult for the Caribbean to go back to agriculture and manufacturing without the capacity in international trade law to use protectionism. We have, therefore, to see ourselves as an export-driven service economy in a large measure. We would like to be able to have a more diversified economy, but the diversification will come largely within the context of the export sectors themselves. Caribbean tourism has largely been sea, sand, and sun, but we have not yet begun even to scratch the surface as to what a tourism sector should be like. I thought in Barbados, for example, to make Barbados a location. I'm not saying this to let tourists and Caicos, because they wanted to become my main one constituency. But why isn't Barbados competing with? Why isn't the Caribbean competing with Florida as a place for retirement? We have a better climate than Florida.